This dramatic story began in 1995. The bodies of two lovers were found on the shore of Juliette Lake in the state of Georgia. It took the authorities almost 2 years to identify and arrest the criminal. The last word in this case was said 18 years after the crime was committed. Juliette is an unincorporated community and census-designated place in Monroe County, Georgia. Just a couple of days into the new year of 1995, many people were still in a holiday mood. However, it was a challenging time for a local sheriff who was used to having an easy job. On January 3rd, a man called the police and reported that he had stumbled upon two lifeless bodies while taking a walk near Juliette Lake. The sheriff and his deputy immediately went to the crime scene. To understand the scale of Juliette, you only need to look at the sheriff's office. Nothing more severe than a fight or a theft had ever happened there. That's why the sheriff and his deputy were shocked by what they saw. A white Honda was parked on the shore of the lake, inside of which was the body of a man. Not far from the car, the body of a young woman lay on the ground. You didn't have to be an expert to see that both had died from gunshot wounds. Inside the car, the victims' personal belongings were found, including their documents. These made it clear that the male body in the driver's seat was 22-year-old Grant Hendrickson. The second victim of this violent crime was 19-year-old Michele Cartagena. The state police were notified about the incident, and soon officers from the Major Crimes Unit arrived at the lake, along with forensic experts. The first thing that caught the detectives' attention and could potentially indicate a motive was Michele's partially exposed body, with her skirt pulled up. Judging from the bullet holes on the car, detectives concluded that the criminal had opened fire at the couple while they were sitting inside. Grant was struck by 3 bullets and had no chance of survival. Michele was shot twice and presumably remained conscious when the criminal pulled her out of the car. The position of Michele's body, with her legs spread wide open, suggested that the criminal might have attempted to take advantage of her helplessness but did not, as life had already left her. Forensic experts found dark mucus on the inner part of her thighs, which turned out to be saliva containing chewing tobacco particles. Samples of this saliva were sent to a lab for analysis, but during the examination of the crime scene, the police found critical evidence: bullet casings of 2 different calibers, 13 casings of .2133 caliber, and 4 casings of 9mm caliber were recovered. The presence of 2 types of casings raised the possibility that 2 weapons, and possibly 2 criminals, were involved. Both Grant's and Michele's families were devastated when they learned about the tragedy. They couldn't imagine who could commit such an atrocity, or why anyone would want to harm their children. Grant, like Michele, was the only child of his parents. Michele Cartagena was born on May 2, 1975, in Monterey, California. She was an exceptional young woman. In high school, she was part of the marching orchestra band, the top singles tennis player, the leader of her school's softball team, and a member of the National Honor Society. In her free time, Michele volunteered for the Red Cross Society and an animal welfare association, and she frequently visited elderly people. Her father described her as a gifted and talented woman, full of love and life, who aspired to make a career in medicine to help others and contribute to society. Grant Hendrickson was born on September 20, 1972, in Macon, Georgia. He liked fishing, golf, canoeing, and camping. Like his girlfriend, he was also involved in community life and worked as a volunteer at the Museum of Arts and Sciences in Macon from the age of 15. Those who knew the couple assumed that it was their active lifestyles that attracted them to each other. Who was it who could commit such a cold-blooded crime? Residents of Monroe County seriously feared for their safety because the man who dealt with the young couple by the lake was walking free and could possibly strike again. Grant and Michele studied at Mercer University. Grant was in his 5th year and Michele was in her 2nd year. They had been dating for a little over a year, had already made plans for their future together, and were about to have a wedding. Detectives had to find out who ruined their plans. When their relatives couldn't name anyone who would wish evil upon them, the investigators headed to Mercer University in Macon. Talking with Grant and Michelle's classmates, the officers hoped to learn something useful for the investigation. Both Michele and Grant were in good standing at the university, did not have conflicts with anyone, and were generally described as good, kind people. The detectives assumed that the crime could have been committed by a man who had feelings for Michele but was rejected. However, this version was not confirmed and was pushed to the background. Visiting Mercer University did not give the police any clues that could have helped them get on the criminal's trail. Reconstructing the chronology of the events preceding the deaths of Grant and Michele, detectives found out that on January 2, they visited a restaurant. After their meal, they headed to the cinema. After the movie ended, they went to a holiday camp at Juliette Lake. This camp was open 24 hours a day and included a boat launching area, parking lot, small dock, and picnic tables. The public could use this place for free, which is why there was no personnel or security. On the night of the crime, there were other people around different parts of the lake. Some of them said that they heard loud popping noises, but since it was January 2, they mistook the sounds for firecrackers. Someone also reported seeing a 1980s Honda CRX leaving the parking lot at high speed. Meanwhile, experts managed to extract the DNA sample from saliva found on Michelle's thigh. However, at that time, the DNA database was in its infancy. The DNA Identification Act, which allowed the FBI to create a national DNA database of convicted criminals, as well as separate databases containing information about missing people and forensic samples collected from crime scenes, was passed by the U.S. Congress only in 1994. This meant there was nothing to compare the DNA sample extracted from the saliva discovered on Michelle's body with. It could have only shown a match if compared directly to the DNA of the criminal. The survey of personnel at the restaurant and cinema that Grant and Michele visited before their deaths did not provide any results either. There were no conflicts or anything out of the ordinary at either location. The authorities speculated that Grant and Michele could have been either accidental victims or had crossed someone not long before their deaths. The detectives did not see any other reasons. The young couple studied well, were not associated with any shady people, and did not use illegal substances. The fact that the criminal did not take money or other valuables from the car pointed to the possibility that the motive of the crime wasn't greed, but something else. The state forensic lab reported that the weapons used for the crime were likely an AR-15 rifle and a 9mm Ruger pistol. The police questioned over 100 people, and a few dozen potential suspects were ruled out after they voluntarily provided samples of their DNA for comparison. As a result, the investigation reached a dead end more than a year and a half after the crime. In the fall of 1996, Agent Randy Upton of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation took control of the case. Having thoroughly studied it, he decided to change his approach and started looking not for the criminal himself, as his predecessors did, but for his weapon, which was used during the attack on Grant and Michele. Agent Upton went to the largest gun store in Macon and asked for a list of people who had bought an AR-15 rifle in the period from 1985 to 1995. Now, the agent had a list of 108 names. He began to call people from that list, telling them that they would be a great help to the investigation if they allowed their weapon to be examined and provided a DNA sample for analysis. Most of the people Upton called agreed to cooperate. The list of potential suspects gradually shrank after experts conducted the appropriate tests. On November 27, 1996, Upton called 22-year-old Andrew Allen Cook, who was on that same list. In conversation with Andrew, Agent Upton explained the goal of his call and asked for Cook's permission to examine his rifle. Andrew replied that it would be impossible, as he had sold it back in April 1994, which was 8 months before Grant and Michelle's deaths. But according to data from the gun store, Andrew Cook could not have sold his rifle in April 1994, as he had only bought it in August of the same year. Agent Upton realized that his interlocutor was lying. When Upton asked Cook to provide his DNA sample, he said that he would need to speak with his father, who was an FBI agent, before doing so, and after that, he hung up. Upton immediately realized that Andrew Cook might be the exact person he was looking for. It was discovered that 5 months after the deaths of Grant and Michele, in May 1995, Cook pawned his rifle at one of the gun stores. The police also found out that in December 1993, Cook's acquaintance had bought a Ruger pistol for him, since he was too young at the time to buy it himself. He got rid of the pistol by selling it to one of his friends in July 1995, right after he pawned the rifle. To sum up everything said above, it can be stated that, in the course of 6 months after the deaths of Grant and Michele, Andrew Cook got rid of both his rifle and pistol, which was hardly just a coincidence. The more the police learned about Cook, the more they became certain that they were moving in the right direction. As it turned out, soon after the deaths of Grant and Michele, he did not only get rid of his weapons, but his car as well. A 1987 Honda CRX. This vehicle matched a description of a car seen near the crime scene. Cook worked in a diaper factory, and Agent Upton decided to visit this organization. Andrew was not at work, but the agent spoke with his friend and colleague. According to court documents, a colleague said that recently they had talked about the worst thing they had ever done, and Andrew said that he shot somebody with a rifle. The colleague didn't believe the story but asked why he did it, to which Cook replied that he wanted to see if he could do something like this and get away with it. The colleague also said that Andrew chewed tobacco very often. Another friend testified that Cook told him in late November 1996 that he needed to leave town because it was getting hot. These many coincidences could not be accidental, and Agent Upton started looking for Andrew Cook, who had not lived in his parents' home for a few years now. On December 4, 1996, Randy Upton contacted his father and arranged a meeting. John Cook was indeed an FBI agent with 29 years of service. During the meeting, Agent Upton explained to John that he was investigating the crime committed at Juliette Lake, and this is why he wanted to talk with his son Andrew but couldn't find him. John had heard about the case of Grant and Michele from the media, but had not participated in the investigation. He told Upton that he didn't consider his son a suspect, but promised that he would definitely find him and talk with him. Later that day, John managed to reach Andrew on the phone. He told his son that the detective in charge of the Juliette Lake crime was looking for him and asked if he knew anything about it. His son's response turned his entire world upside down. Andrew said, "Daddy, I can't tell you. You're one of them. You're a cop." When asking the next question, John Cook was praying for his son to say no. "Was it you shooting?" he asked, and after a short pause, Andrew said yes. He told his father that on the night he was fishing at Juliette Lake, when the couple drove there, he had an argument with the guy behind the wheel. According to him, Grant threatened him with a pistol. He got angry, took his rifle, and did something that cannot be undone. John Cook asked his son to reach out to the authorities, but Andrew said that he would just disappear. John was shocked by his son's story. It was very hard for him, but he still acted professionally. The next day, John visited the Monroe County Sheriff's Office and told them about his son's confession. At that time, no one knew that Andrew had been arrested that morning in the neighboring county for shooting deer and turkey outside the hunting season. He introduced himself under an assumed name, but it became immediately apparent when Andrew Cook had been arrested. He went to Jones County to speak with him. Upton didn't know yet that the day before, Andrew had confessed everything to his father. Having arrived at the Jones County Sheriff's Office, Upton introduced himself and asked Andrew Cook if he could answer a couple of questions, to which he replied, "2 years have passed and you guys don't have anything. I once had a Honda. I once had a rifle. And I once had a Ruger. But now you are trying to set me up." Then he said that if they called his father and found him a lawyer, he would confess everything. Andrew was delivered to Monroe County, and the sheriff allowed John Cook to talk with Andrew one-on-one. When John hugged his son, they both cried. John said that he couldn't believe that Andrew had told him the truth, to which Andrew replied that he was not fishing that night, and that when he arrived at the lake, the car of the victims was already there. Grant and Michele didn't even see how he walked to the car with his rifle and opened fire. Then, according to him, he fired a few more shots from his pistol and pulled the woman out of the car. To confuse the police, he spat on Michele on purpose, just to confirm that the police wouldn't find him by his saliva. Andrew Cook was charged in the case of Grant Hendrickson and Michele Cartagena. In addition to his confession, the police identified the current owners of the rifle and pistol that Andrew used when he committed the crime. A forensic ballistic examination found that Michele's and Grant's lives were taken with these same guns. Andrew also had his DNA sample taken, which matched the sample extracted from the saliva found on Michele's body. The trial began in 1998. John Cook was a speaker at the trial. He repeatedly apologized before Grant's and Michele's families, while also saying that his apologies would hardly bring them peace. He said that he dedicated his whole life to his service and did not notice how evil consumed his son. On March 19, 1998, Andrew Cook was found guilty. He was given a death sentence, which, after Cook used all his attempts to appeal, was scheduled for February 22, 2013. 3 days before this date, on February 19, 2013, the State Board of Pardons and Paroles gathered to consider a clemency appeal filed by Andrew's attorneys on his behalf. The attorneys tried to convince the board that Andrew was mentally unhealthy and needed treatment. After considering the appeal, the State Board voted against clemency. On the day of the execution, February 22, 2013, the family visited Andrew in prison to say goodbye to him. He was also allowed to order his last meal. He chose a steak, baked potatoes, fried shrimp, lemon pie, and soda. As he was strapped to a gurney in the death chamber, he used his last words to say, "I'm sorry. I'm not going to ask you to forgive me. I can't even do it myself." He thanked his family for their support and for being with him and added, "I'm sorry I took so much from you all." The injection was performed at 11:08 p.m. 14 minutes later, 38-year-old Andrew Cook was pronounced dead. After the execution, Grant's mother, Mary Hendrickson, said that she had been waiting for justice for 18 years. She added, "I think that's what it was, the devil's work. When all that was going on, I was just thinking to myself, well, the devil is not going to win. He's not going to win over my heart. He is not going to win over my life. He is not going to win over anything I do. He is actively trying to make trouble for any of us and is always succeeding." On June 21, 2023, the media reported that John Cook had died at the age of 81.